In this session, we're going to be talking about the topic that we regret the growing prevalence of working from home. Let's quickly have a look at what we'll be doing in this session. Because this is the first round of the year, we're going to have a quick refresher on debating basics and how to debate. Then we're going to talk about the debating context and why this debate is taking place. Thirdly, we'll have a conversation about setup, talking specifically about a definition and a counterfactual. Then we'll talk about brainstorming points and how to write and structure arguments, before finally giving some debating tips and pointers for how to write this case and how to write these speeches for this specific topic. If you'd like to, pause this video now and think about what the goal of a debate is. The answer that I hope you all came up with is persuasiveness. The adjudicator, that is the person who awards debates, will ultimately assess the overall persuasiveness of both teams by considering all material advanced and discrediting information that would not be credible to the average reasonable person. Usually, they assess material in reference to which team wins the big issues, as well as which content is more important and how it was said. They will decide the winner first and then assign scores based on, of course, persuasiveness. The next question to ask them is, how do we persuade the adjudicator? Well, firstly, by providing compelling points with good logic and helpful evidence, by explaining why the opposition team is wrong, by having a good flow and structure to your speech, and by using persuasive language and mannerisms. And ultimately, each of these points falls into the categories of manner, matter, and method. Now that we better understand the goals of debating and how to be successful within a debate, let's turn now to context and ask the question, why is this debate happening? The first thing I'd love for you all to observe is the graph shown on the screen of the population of people working from home. And I'd love for you to pause this video and look at the spike that occurs between February to April of 2020. That spike is the result of COVID-19, which forced hundreds of millions of people to stop working in traditional environments and instead work from home. But the other thing I'd like for you to consider is the second bar graph, which shows that 43% of individuals work remotely more often, even though COVID-19 has been contained. And I'd love for you all to consider why that would be the case. And we're going to look at those reasons and think about why later on. Following on from that, it's worth noting the following dot points. That most people were forced to transition to a work from home environment, that 71% of people that could be working from home began to, as opposed to 8.2% prior to the pandemic starting, that globally, a quarter of people wanted to work in the office 5 days a week as soon as the pandemic was over, and that more than a third of people in South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Peru, India, and the US also wanted to return to a 5-day work week in the office. Now that we have that context, let's focus on this debate more specifically. The first thing I hope you've all noticed is that this topic is a regret topic, and there are a few things to consider when you're given a regret motion. The first thing is that regret debates are always retrospective. That is, you must deal with the world as it actually is. You cannot propose changes and build your case off what might have happened. You have to deal with the world as it actually is. For example, in the debate that we regret the rise of social media, you have to talk about social media as it is and how it's impacted people's lives. You cannot propose reforms. You cannot propose changes. You have to deal with social media as it currently exists. There are a few other things you need for a regret debate. Firstly, you need criteria. What does it mean for something to be regrettable? Second, you need context. Why did the thing that we're regretting happen? Think of the context that we discussed earlier. Finally, you need a counterfactual. What does the world look like without the thing that you regret? For example, in a world without social media, what does that look like? Do people operate differently? Do people communicate differently? How does it change? That is the counterfactual. Even though the form is a little bit different, the way you win a regret debate is exactly the same. All you should care about is being persuasive. That is how adjudicators will judge you, and that won't change regardless of the topic. Now that we better understand what a regret debate is, let's think about definitions and setup. Firstly, what is a definition and how do they work in regret debates? A definition describes the key terms and provides the foundations for a debate. They work in exactly the same way that they do in a should debate. They define key terms and allow everyone to understand what we're actually talking about. For example, in this debate, it's worth considering what working from home actually means. The second thing to consider is whether or not you need a model in regret debates. Because they are retrospective and you can't change anything about the world, you're rather assessing what the world looks like, you do not need a model or a countermodel. You're not proposing any changes, you're simply assessing the world. What you do need, though, is a counterfactual. And a counterfactual, as we talked about before, is what the world looks like without this thing. So in this debate, a counterfactual is the world without the growing prevalence of working from home. An affirmative team and a negative team need to have an idea of what the counterfactual is because it should lay the foundations of your case. That is, if you're the affirmative team and you're regretting the growing prevalence of working from home, your counterfactual should be the basis for how you prove that the world without working from home is better. So how should we define working from home in this debate? Pause the video now and brainstorm 2 to 3 key elements which make working from home unique. You might like to consider the environment. Where is the work being done? Secondly, the types of work. Would a teacher marking exams at home count in this debate? And thirdly, the stakeholders. Are students and the concept of homework relevant in this debate? The next thing to consider is what growing prevalence means, because it might mean different things for different people. Does an increase of 0.1% represent growing prevalence? If so, why? And it's important to have an understanding of what growing prevalence is, because it should inform how you write your case. If the growing prevalence is quite big, then your harms and benefits will be quite big. If the growing prevalence is small, then your harms and benefits will also probably be quite small. And so it's worth considering what growing prevalence is because it should inform the scale of impact in this debate. I hope that you've had the chance to pause the video and define working from home and think about what growing prevalence might mean. And if you've done both of those things, it's time to bring it all together and finish off the setup. So take a minute and write down a sentence which says, we define working from home as, we define growing prevalence as, and then finally, finish off the sentence, we think the counterfactual looks like a world where XYZ happens. And once you've finished that, you've finished setup for this debate. Once we've finished setup, it's time to move on to brainstorming arguments. Pause this video now and think of 4 arguments for either the affirmative team or the negative team. Some things to consider are who the different stakeholders are in this debate and who should we care about. For example, should we care about the companies, the employees, the families of employees or workers, or anyone else that you might think of? Take a minute to pause the video and think of 4 arguments now. Once you've brainstormed those arguments, it's time to think about what makes a good argument and how we can improve what you've all written down. First, it's important that they have a clear structure so everyone is able to follow what you're saying. Second, it's important that it's not repetitive or contradictory, so you're getting the most out of everything that you say. Third, it's important that it's credible and concise so that we can all understand and believe what you're saying. Helpful examples and evidence are important in illustrating your point and giving a new world of understanding. It's important that you explain the how and the why. Sure, something might be true, something might be likely, but why should I care that it's true? Or why should I care that it's likely? Why does it actually get you in this debate? And finally, linking it to different stakeholders and proving how your side and how your arguments impact every single person that's relevant in a debate. Once you have an idea on both the arguments, but also on how to write good arguments, it's important to consider how you structure those arguments. There are two structures that I recommend. The first is Oreo, saying what your opinion is, saying what the reason for that is, explaining with an example, and then restating why your opinion is the way that it is. O-R-E-O. The second structure you can use is a peel paragraph. It's sometimes called a teal paragraph, saying what your point or topic sentence is, giving an explanation for that, providing an example, and then linking it back to the topic. It's important to note for both the example stage in the Oreo paragraph and also the example stage in the peel paragraph that you explain why your example or why your evidence is true. For example, it's not enough to simply get up and state a case study or state a news article as evidence or as an example. Because firstly, the other team might get up and say that it's not true. The other team might get up and say they have evidence or a case or a news article which says the exact opposite. Or you might have accidentally misunderstood and misinterpreted what that case study or what that news article is saying. What I recommend you do in this third stage when you're explaining an example is understand the reasons behind that news article or the reasons behind that case study and explain those instead. For example, in this debate, if a case study or a news article says that working from home increased happiness, don't just state the news article and its findings. Research why that might be the case and give those reasons. That is far more persuasive, that is far more concrete, that is far more understandable. Let's quickly look at an example. This is following the peel paragraph idea. The topic is that books are better than movies. The point is that books are more educational. The reason or explanation for that is that while both books and movies can entertain you, stories and books have far greater value educationally because they help with reading, grammar, and vocabulary. For example, by reading, you may learn how to spell and understand difficult words that are included in your book. Therefore, books are better educational tools. Books are better than movies. Using this example and using this structure, I'd love for you all to go back at the points that you brainstormed and work out if they follow this structure, and if not, how to improve them and how to edit them so that they better respond and better relate to the Oreo or peel structure. Finally, some helpful hints to consider when going forward. Firstly, this debate is not a policy or a should debate. You should focus on proving whether or not what's already happened was good or bad. Don't worry about models or changes. Only think about the world as it actually is. Second, draw examples from different work environments. Working from home might not impact everyone the same. In fact, some people might have different experiences, and there might be some groups who are more important than others, who are more vulnerable, who are impacted more. Thirdly, you might disagree with your opposition team's counterfactual. That's perfectly fine. In the same way that you might disagree with a team's model and its efficacy, it's important that you have reasons why your side and your counterfactual is more likely or correct. Finally, remember that this is not a debate about whether or not working from home is good or bad, but specifically whether or not a growing prevalence leads to more benefit or more harm. For example, would a world where everyone works from home be a good one? Is that even where we're headed? Should it be? Thinking about growing prevalence and its impact on material is incredibly important. Finally, I would encourage you all to Google the Queensland Debating Union YouTube channel, which has a host of resources which are incredibly useful. For example, how to write practical points, or how to write a case for a regret debate, as well as examples of regret debates for you to watch and for you to gain some insight out of. Thank you so much for your participation in this session.